Okay, just testing, testing. Hello, while I get everything set up. Make sure everyone can hear me. All right, let's get this going so I can make sure everything is ready. Check. That's all right, everyone. It is time for the end of your Friday work week, mastering your qualitative methodology webinar. I hope everyone has had a wonderful week so far and is looking forward to a great weekend. My name is Dr. Joanna Broussard. I am a qualitative research specialist and mentor with Statistics Solutions. We are a full service dissertation consulting and assistance company here to help you with all of your dissertation and research needs. We're going to get started with the webinar in just a second, but I just want to let everyone know I do have the webinar chat up so that way I can see any questions you have. You may type your questions in there. You may also type them in the Q&A. I will attempt to answer them when I see them as close to the material appropriate to the question as possible. So that way, when you receive your recorded copy of the webinar in a few days, you will be able to have the topic of discussion, your question, and then my response. But should we have enough time, which we most likely will, there will also be a bit of time for questions at the end. So, give me a second to sip some tea. And let us begin. So, we're talking now about writing the third chapter of your dissertation, which is where you will present your methodology if you are doing a qualitative based study. So, like with all academic writing, and this is something just to get used to, there are 3 sections to any piece of academic writing, whether it be a paragraph, an essay, a research paper, a conference talk, a dissertation chapter, a book chapter, or your dissertation itself. There is the introduction, where you tell your audience what you're going to tell them and get them excited to learn more. The body, where you tell it to them in all of the detail you have so they can know as much as you feel they need to know. And the conclusion or the summary, where you tell them what you just told them and then you give them some sort of a takeaway. Get used to that form of repetition because repetition is one of the hallmarks of the academic writing style. And so as we look at the overview of the chapter, the introduction is the introduction, research design, role of the researcher, methodology, and issues of trustworthiness are your body, and the summary is your conclusion. So that is how we divide it into these 3 broad sections. And we'll be talking about each one of these sections individually today. So, the introduction. You've got 2 big goals here. You need to restate the purpose of the study, like you put it in chapter 1, and it needs to be verbatim. You need to say exactly what you said using the exact same words as you have said in chapter 1 and probably in chapter 2 as well. Yes, this will get repetitive, But again, that is the nature of academic writing. And then you need to preview each of the sections that will follow. You don't want to give too much away, but you want to give enough detail so that way we know that way we as in your reader, your chair, your committee, anyone who looks at this later sees that there is a plan and that you've given some thought to it. The introduction to this chapter should roughly be about a page. Everything else, the page count will depend on what you're doing, but roughly you want to keep the introduction to about a page. You just want to hit the highlights of what is to come so we know what to expect. Okay? From there, you will move into your research design. You will restate your research questions, whether you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many. You will restate them one at a time, verbatim, and then you will identify and define the phenomenon, the case, or the concept you're going to be studying. You want to be specific and you want to be detailed. One, specificity allows you to control the borders and the bounds of your study. If you were studying, say, the Cajun Mardi Gras Festival in the town of New Iberia, Louisiana, that level of specificity allows you to then go back later when someone says, well, what about Cajun Mardi Gras in Mamou or Guédon or some other town? You can then say, yes, those are important and those are something that should be studied, but I focus on this specifically. The more specific you are, the better it is for people to know exactly what you are studying. And the more detail you provide here in terms of describing it, well, what is this? When does it happen? What is the experience? What is known about it? This is where you're providing some of that background so we know what you're talking about. Yes, you've provided some of this previously, but you're doing this again so that way people can see, okay, we're talking about this phenomenon, this event, this case, this concept in this position, in this place, at this time, with these parameters. You are getting out all of the things people need to know to understand that you have a specific research plan in place. You will identify the tradition and the design style, which is qualitative or quantitative. If you are in this webinar, I assume you are at least considering qualitative. And you will talk about the design of the study, a case study, a general qualitative study, phenomenology, ethnography, grounded theory. We'll talk a bit more about these in a little bit, but you'll identify what you are going to study, how you are going to study it, qualitative case, qualitative phenomenology, qualitative grounded theory. But you need to demonstrate at least a passing familiarity and understanding of the other options. You need to be able to demonstrate that you know a little bit about what quantitative is and what it offers, about all of the different types of qualitative design, what they offer, and you have to justify your choices. Why did you choose qualitative case study? Why did you choose qualitative phenomenology? You are not suggesting that this is the one true way to do it, but you are arguing that this research design is the best way to answer the questions that you seek to answer about your phenomenon. You are making a rhetorical argument that this is the best way, and you'll have to be able to justify it with reference to cited literature. Okay? Now, why would you choose qualitative research design? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what qualitative offers for a little bit, okay? Do you have a lot of textual data, interviews, documents, things that have a lot of words as opposed to a lot of statistics? Do you have a lot of information that is drawn from either websites, manuscripts, essays from students, interviews, focus groups? Qualitative will probably get you more of what you're seeking than quantitative. Not always. So you have to really think about what it is that you're trying to do. And this is where you need to think about, am I trying to get at perspectives of people? Am I trying to understand their experiences with a particular thing? This is really where qualitative research shines, when you are trying to understand the perspectives and the experiences of other people. So something like, I'm going to use some examples from some of my clients, trying to understand the experiences of first generation English language learners with a particular program that was piloted in their school district to help them not just learn English, but become college ready. While you can look at test scores and college acceptance rates to say, oh, the program was successful. If you get their perspectives and seek out the experiences of those who have passed through the program, you can get a better sense of not just that the program was or was not effective, but what worked, what didn't work, what could be done to improve, what really stood out to these people as beneficial. And so you're seeking their perspectives and their experiences. And it's a lot easier to get at that and to get more deep, meaningful data through qualitative methods than you can with quantitative methods, if that is your goal. Another example would be trying to seek out sort of the general essence, the phenomenon of self-care as practiced by mental health care professionals working for community-based organizations, schools, free clinics, prisons, home shelters for the unhoused. How do they care for themselves and their own mental health? It's easy to say, well, do you do this? Yes, no. Do you do this? But to sort of get at what is that phenomenon like? What is the essential experience? That is something that qualitative data gathering methods can help you really get in deep with. And so how do you plan to collect data? Do you want to do interviews, focus groups? You're probably going to be using qualitative methods, document analysis, observation, whether that be simply observing a phenomenon or more ethnographic participant observation, where you participate in a phenomenon and take notes on it, as well as observing it and how other people who perform this engage with it. Anthropologists are known for using participant observation. They go into a cultural setting, whether it be something as local as, say, a local harvest festival. Maybe they go to religious services or Comic-Con, or they go to another culture for a festival, or to live with that other culture to understand their way of life. They participate in those experiences, writing and journaling their own experiences while speaking with and observing natives and those who are in that culture group so they can get a sense of what it was like from both insider and outsider perspectives. Now, you need to recognize a few things. One, your goal is probably not going to be to make a generalization because you are studying a phenomenon through that is so particular, or you are gathering data from a particular group of people. You may not be able to generalize much beyond a particular event or locale. The initial example I gave, Cajun Mardi Gras in New Iberia, Louisiana. Depending upon the data you collect, you may not be able to generalize beyond New Iberia or maybe beyond small town Mardi Gras in Louisiana. So you're probably not going to try to generalize, but what you really want to be doing is understanding this phenomenon. You really want to get a deep, rich understanding of what is happening here in this place at this time. And then as a result, you're probably not going to be testing a hypothesis. You are going to be seeking to answer research questions, but you're not trying to hypothesize that something is happening. You go in with questions of what you want to learn, what you want to observe, what you want to seek out. How do people in New Iberia practice Mardi Gras? What are the experiences of mental health care providers working for community mental health care organizations? What are their experiences with self-care? What are the experiences and perceptions of people who have gone through this English language learner college readiness program, with how the program has or has not helped them achieve their educational goals from high school through college transition? You go in with questions that you seek to answer, not hypotheses you seek to test. That is a difference to really think about. And you are not necessarily trying to quantify results. You're not looking for, oh, 75% of my respondents said this, 12% said this. You want to see the emergent themes, the emergent essences. Depending on the type of research design you use, you'll be looking for different things, but you're not necessarily going to be quantifying results. Why? Well, you may only have 4 or 5 people who you may interview, let's say 10 people. Well, if 4 or 5 people say something, that might be the biggest percentage, but it's not enough to make a generalization about a larger population from just even 10 interviews, 12 interviews. And you don't want to do much more than that because of the time it takes to transcribe and code, and we will talk about that in a little bit. But first, let's look at the different research designs. A case study, phenomenology, generic, grounded theory, and ethnography. If you're doing a qualitative research design, whatever you're doing is probably going to fall into one of these. So, well, okay, Jerry, you've asked, how do you derive hypothetical statements and test it? As I have said, we are not doing that in qualitative research. We are not testing hypotheses. We are answering questions. So you're not going to be looking to test a statement. You're going in with something along the lines of, what are the experiences of these people from this phenomenon or in this situation? And then you're seeking to see what they say. You are not testing a hypothesis. That is something you would do in quantitative, but not qualitative. So, as I was saying, with case study, a case study is really good if you want to look at a specific example over time for an in-depth analysis, such as, I want to follow one person who is either atypical from what we know about a population, exemplar, who goes counter to what the research has said, or would take us in a new direction. One case, one person, one school district, one thing. You want to follow it over, say, multiple months, multiple years. Keep in mind with a dissertation, you probably can't do multiple years because you really want to move and write your dissertation within 1 to 2 years from the time you get approval to start working on it. But you want to follow you might want to follow one example over a long period of time to really get in deep and understand that example. Or you might want to study multiple quote unquote cases that are bounded by a single factor, such as multiple middle schools in a single school district, especially if they are using a particular, say, teaching method to try and teach mathematics to students, or a particular English language learning type of thing, or a particular science education program that's experimental, that's new. Maybe they're testing it out, and you want to get a sense of what their experience has been after using it for 1 year. And so that is your case. These middle schools, or say middle school math teachers in a particular school district. And so this is what your case would be. And you would probably have multiple data collection methods. Interviews are always a good idea to collect data from. You might do a focus group if you don't have enough time for interviews. We'll be talking more later, but interviews allow you to go in really deep with one person at a time and get in depth on their experiences, while focus groups allow you to collect a broader range of experiences in a shorter amount of time. You might have observations on the case, on the phenomenon that you're researching, which means you might have field notes from yourself. You might have journal depending on if you participated or if you interacted during an event. You may look at documents, newspaper clippings, flyers. If you're looking at some sort of educational program, you might have the educational materials, the syllabi of the teachers. You might look at textbooks. You might look at test scores. You might look at student evaluated documents, assignments, essays. The data sources you get need to be chosen to help answer your research questions. And so, why would you choose this? Well, a case study allows you to generate, as I've said, rich, deep descriptions of a case or of the cases that you're studying. You can examine the emerging themes. Well, what are the common themes that pop up? What are the common challenges? What are the common barriers? This is often chosen if you're in education. Some other clients I've had have dealt with things like parental involvement in education. Research has long held that students fare better when parents are involved. And so so you might be seeking, well, how have principals gone about getting parents involved. What have they done? What has worked? What hasn't worked? What are some of the barriers to parental involvement? And that might involve interviewing school principals. That might involve interviewing parents. Why, if you are not as involved as you would like to be, why are you not? And seeing the common patterns emerge from these people's experiences. And so this is what a case study offers you. Now, a case study is fairly easy, it's fairly straightforward. More detailed is phenomenology. I've hinted at this in some of the other things I've talked about, but this is where you really want to explore the lived experience of participants and get the essential meaning of a phenomenon as your participants have experienced it. You will really want to do in-depth interviews. I've got one client who chose to do focus groups, and it's a little bit harder to really get in deep because with focus groups, some people can monopolize a conversation, whereas the interviews would allow for more in-depth research and in-depth answers one at a time. So now, while it might seem that it's common to say that all of this is illuminating commonality, because I've already mentioned how in a case study, you're trying to get the common theme or the common themes that emerge. Phenomenology is distinct because once you find these commonalities of experience, you then want to distill it to what the essences are. You don't want the full breadth of the experiences. You want that one essential experience. What is the most common experience among all of my participants regarding whether it be self-care, whether it be choosing to go childless or child-free, even as an adult, whether it be going through a particular healthcare program when you were trying to navigate a major surgery and recovery process. What has been the essential experience? That is what phenomenology is good for. And it's not easy because with phenomenology, you have to take all of your preconceived ideas and what all of this means to you, and you need to bracket it and you need to set it aside because you were really trying to see what this experience was for your participants. And it can be a challenge. So that's why we need to think about that. Most people and most of the studies are going to be this, generic. Well, what happens when you have research questions that don't really fit in the other designs, or you have things that are elements of multiple designs? This is where a generic design will come into place. What if the focus is outward? You just want to learn about the experience, but not inward, how people make sense of it. Again, this is probably going to be most of the studies that people do. It is the easiest to set up because you are really just trying to figure out what the experience was like. Working with, say, what is it like to be a volunteer for Special Olympics? Is something one of my clients has worked on. And she chose generic because she wanted the experience. Well, what came out of it? Not, well, how did you make sense of being someone working at Special Olympics? How did you make sense of all of this? Phenomenology, case study, these things really help you dig into the inner lived experiences. If you just want to look at the general experience and what it was like, then this is probably the one for you. If you plan on doing mixed methods, Do you want to have a survey? Do you want to have some quantitative research? Then this is what you're going to be probably choosing, because it'll generic qualitative designs align better with quantitative research than more specific anthropological, ethnographic, grounded theory, phenomenological case studies. These work better for that. But be careful with mixed methods, because more often than not, and I've seen this when I was a professor and I saw this with students, and I see this here with my clients. When someone chooses mixed methods, they're often really good and really skilled and really detailed at preparing for one side of it, either quant or qual, but they don't really give a lot of attention to the other. And so it becomes either quantitative with a few qualitative questions, or qualitative with a small survey. So if you want to do mixed methods, really think about how you're going to bring those together. And that's for a different webinar. So how do you do generic qualitative? Well, you're probably going to have some interviews. You'll probably have one or more questionnaires or surveys. They may be written, they may be oral. You're going to bring together a lot of different things to sort of get a sense of what's going on. And again, this is good for getting outer world examples of research. You can understand the phenomenon and as what happened, but you're probably not going to delve deeply into how participants make sense of the experience. You're just getting the experience. And so that is where this can be useful. But if you really want to go deep, you need to go somewhere. You need to do one of the other methods that we've talked about, and we're about to continue to talk about. So let's talk grounded theory. Are you really trying to generate theory from the perspectives of a vast number of participants? This might be for you. Is there really almost nothing known about your topic? Now, read this next sentence with me. Not for novice researchers. I do not advise people who are still in grad school to do grounded theory. Grounded theory is a lot of work, and it requires a lot of knowledge about your subject matter, because you need a vast number of participants. And in the span of time that most universities want you to have for your dissertation, you don't have that. You don't have the luxury of that time. You need to go back again and again. You have one group of participants and you analyze their data, and then you generate a theory. Then you go back and you get more participants and you test, does your theory hold up with more participants? Yes, great. Do it again. No, it doesn't. Well, then you've got to revise and you've still got to do it again. You're doing multiple passes with multiple sets of participants. And this takes time. But if you really do have something that there isn't a lot of data on, perhaps you should think about this. I would not advise it, but this is an option. This will involve, as I have said, interviews, field work, textual analysis, document analysis, memoing, getting theoretical saturation. You will be interviewing a lot of people. You'll be going into the field. You'll probably be taking notes on what you see in the field. You'll be taking notes and making memos about the interviews. You'll be analyzing documents. And the goal is to get theoretical saturation. The point at which as you continue to collect data, nothing changes. nothing new emerges. How long will that take? I can't answer that. It's different for every project. And so grounded theory is a lot of work, and it takes a lot of understanding of your method, of your population, and of your topic. I do not advise it if you are in grad school. But what does it do? Why would someone think about this? Well, it helps you derive a theory that is grounded in the data. It's theory from the ground up. And it can produce a broad explanation of a process, an action, an interaction, or the experience of a population. I have one client currently who is working on a grounded theory dissertation studying the process of becoming and navigating homelessness amongst women who were over 50 years of age, a population that is often not studied. And so it's a lot of work. It's a lot of interview data, almost 200 pages of single-spaced transcribed interview data. And so that's a lot to go through and to analyze. So this is grounded theory. The last I want to talk about really is ethnography. Ethnography can be a lot of work, especially in the traditional early 20th century anthropological sense, where you go to a different culture group and you live with them for a full year, studying the people's way of life. But why would you conduct an ethnography? Well, maybe you want to understand a problem or a practice in its cultural context. Maybe you want to do a really holistic inquiry. You want to deal with networks of people, institutions, social groupings. That is what ethnography is good for. Common things, I've mentioned early 20th century ethnographers who would go to a different culture group, live with them for a year, study them, talk to them, learn their language, learn their way of life to help understand them. But things I've mentioned, studying a festival, whether it be Mardi Gras in small town Louisiana, Comic-Con in San Diego, or any other fan gathering, fan con group of, maybe you're studying, say, I've got a friend from grad school who studied intergenerational communication in guilds of World of Warcraft, the video game. How do people across generations communicate while playing this game? Maybe you're studying trading networks for Pokemon cards or Magic the Gathering. Maybe you're trying to really get a sense of the traditional things, or the quote unquote unknown tribes in the rainforests or in these small islands. My master's thesis was directed by a woman who was studying Topolobal, the language of people of the Yucatan in Mexico. She went and she would live with them. She would study their language. She would study their culture. And so learning about the language, not as someone teaching it to you in a class, but as learning it in the social context of how it is used in everyday life. People have studied use ethnography to study the practice of verbal duels, whether it be a boast contest among Irishmen at the pub, whether it be trash talk in sports, whether it be rap battles but not looking just at the battle and the text of the battle, but the battle in the context. What does it mean to this culture in the context in which this is done. And it is a mixed method of data collection, interviews, extended field work, participant observation. Oftentimes, ethnography requires you to participate in that which you observe. If you're studying Comic-Con, maybe you go to Comic-Con and cosplay. If you're studying rap battle, maybe you participate in a rap battle. How good you are is irrelevant. It's participating in the process to really get a sense of what it means to do this. You'll be observing, you'll be having conversations with people. You'll be building networks and relationships with a community so that you can really sort of understand what this means to them as they practice it in their life. And it can produce some really rich, deep, thick descriptions. But as I've said, and as I think I've suggested, it's time consuming. It takes a lot of work. It also can take a lot of money because you have to travel to these locations and spend time living there. A friend of mine from my master's program studied voodoo in Haiti. She had to travel to Haiti and and live in Haiti for the year she was working on her thesis. And so you have to consider the time, the money, the emotional investment of going somewhere, of putting yourself out there into an environment where you may or may not be an outsider. And you may or may not have family with you while you're doing this. When traditional long-term ethnographers have talked about some of the barriers and some of the dangers, they talked about loneliness, of feeling like you were all alone while you were doing this for extended periods of time. And so that is something to consider, but it can produce some amazing results and some amazing understandings of problems and practices in their context. So let's now talk about once you've done your research design, what is your role? You're a researcher. Are you just an observer? Are you going to be just a participant? Are you going to be both? Because in qualitative research, we have to think about who we are as the researcher and how our presence can impact the data we collect. And so we have to identify and describe any potential conflicts of interest, power dynamics that might have, outsider, insider, expert academic knowledge versus people who have lived knowledge, wealth versus poverty, male versus female. How does my ethnicity as a researcher compared to the ethnicity of those whom I'm interviewing? How does that affect what they are willing to, and if they are willing to communicate with me? What are any areas of bias I might have from previous knowledge, from education, if you're an insider? What happens if you think you understand something, but research says you're wrong? Or you learn something different? If you're an outsider, what are your preconceived notions of this practice, these people, this event? And think about other potential ethical issues. Do you work at the study site? Are you a supervisor to the people you are interviewing? All of these things can have impact, and they will need to be considered, especially before you even go to request review and approval from the IRB. because the IRB wants to know that you've planned for this and you understand this. So, having considered your role as a researcher, let's move on to your participants, okay? Who is the population? What is the group of people that your sample will be drawn from? Attendees of the San Diego Comic-Con from the year 2025. Members of the Third Southern Baptist Church in Pascagoula, Mississippi. Participants of Oktoberfest in Munich, Berlin in the year 2024. The population is the entire group from whom your sample is drawn. Middle school teachers of English to non-native speakers in a particular county in Maryland, for instance. What is your sampling strategy going to be? You need to be able to describe your sampling. You will be using non-random sampling because you are trying to get participants who will be able to help you answer your research questions. Most likely you will be using purposive sampling. Purposive sampling is when you say, okay, I'm looking for people who know I need to understand the perspectives of middle school teachers of English to non-native speakers in this county in Maryland. So I will purposefully sample people who are teachers who teach middle school, who teach English to non-native speakers, and who teach this in this particular Maryland county. That is purposive sampling. You seek people who you believe can answer your question. You might also use snowball sampling, which is where you initially have a few people that you've identified as could be able to help you answer, and then you ask them to give you the names and contact information of other people who could be helpful to you. And so your sample size snowballs from there. But one way or another, you need to have inclusion and exclusion criteria. What are the characteristics that people must meet to be able to participate? If you're interviewing teachers, maybe you want 1 year experience, but no more than 5 years experience, because you want you want novice teachers, so 1 to 3. Maybe you want particular ethnicities, particular genders, particular sexual orientations. Maybe you want them to live in a particular area. You need to figure out what criteria will say, yes, you can be in, and where the cutoffs are. You'll need to figure out how you're going to verify this information, and you're going to need to explain why this is the criteria you're choosing. How many participants will you have? In general, you probably want to have between 8 and 12. Some schools will say you have to have a minimum of 10, others don't. You want to have 8 to 12, but you should probably collect 3 to 5 more, because participants do have the option of saying at a later time, hey, I would like to have my data removed from the study. And so you want to make sure you have enough participants. So 8 to 12 is your goal, but 12 to 15 should be what you should strive for, to have a few just in case. You'll need to list out the steps to identify potential participants, how you will contact them, and how you will recruit them. Are you going to just ask them to do it? Are you going to offer some sort of a reward, like say an Amazon gift card? You don't have to offer financial compensation, but you need to think about all of these steps. What's the size of your sample? As I said, 8 to 12 is a good idea for interviews because you've got to transcribe these things and then you've got to code them. But data saturation should be your goal. Even if you have, say, 15 participants and you've transcribed their interviews, once you reach data saturation, the point at which no new codes or themes emerge, that's when you know you can stop coding and you've got enough. At what point will you reach that? It depends. It depends on too many factors to go into. So, what are your instruments? Let's talk about your instrumentation. If you've done any quantitative work, oh, you're probably going to have a survey, a particular study that's just got a set of questions you're going to use. Similarly, with qualitative research, you do have data collection instruments. But the number one instrument is you. You are part of the instrumentation process, collecting data. You might have an observation sheet. You will have an interview protocol, which has the questions you plan to ask. Where are you getting these from? Maybe you are conducting your own, maybe you're creating your own. Maybe you are using something that someone else provided. Is whatever you are using, you have to tell us where you got it from. And then you will have to justify this type of data collection instrument and why you are choosing to use it. For interview protocols that you have created yourself, that might be showing, here's question one. The research says this type of thing is possible, so this question will help me answer RQ1, will help me answer RQ2, et cetera, et cetera. And so be prepared to justify all of these choices. Document review. Well, if you're going to review documents, you have to identify the source and how you have verified that these documents are accurate. Test scores. Are you getting the test scores from the school district? Are you getting the tests? Are these self-reported? Are you getting them from the testing company like EDS? How did you obtain the source? What is the source? And how do you know the source is accurate? We need to have faith in the accuracy of the data. And as I have already hinted at, you will need to demonstrate how these data sources are sufficient to address your research questions. And as we've talked a little bit about it, let's go into a bit more detail with recruitment and data collection. For each of your instruments, you need to provide the following details. Where will you collect the data? Physical location or virtual location? Who will collect the data? Likely you. Frequency of data collection events. How many of these will there be? So if you're interviewing 10, you've got 12, you have 12 interviews with, or 2 interviews with 12 participants each, or two interviews with 12 participants each, sorry, have 24 data collection events. How long will these be? 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes. How long will be the attendance of a particular festival, or how long will you be in the field? How will you record your data? Cell phone, laptop, Zoom, tape recorder, digital recorder. What are your contingency plans in case something goes wrong? Inclement weather, illness, participants back out. How will you debrief your participants at the end of your interview? And what about follow-up procedures for member checking, transcript verification, all of these things that relate to your credibility? You have to detail how you're planning to do all of this at this stage. And once you've done this, you will move on to describe your data analysis plan. This will be this is the step by step of once I've gotten my data, this is how I am going to analyze it. So how are the data connected to your research? How will the data address your research questions? How will you code your data? Braun and Clark is the most common method, but there are others. Will you be using software, in vivo, MaxQDA, things of that nature? How will you handle discrepant cases? What happens if you have data that doesn't conform to things, that goes against what's expected? Remember, negative results are still results. How do you handle it? You've got to figure out how to work that into your data. And again, there's not enough time to go into detail, but go step by step, provide detail, provide citations, show your committee, show the IRB, you have a plan in place. And now let's talk about trustworthiness, because this is something that we think about with qualitative research. So let's talk about how we show that. Credibility. We need to see if there is accuracy in the findings. So this is often why we triangulate interviews, document analysis, focus groups. Do multiple sources of data show the same patterns? That lends credibility to the study. Transferability. How applicable are the findings to other contexts? As I've said earlier, you're probably not going to be able to generalize to super broad populations, but if you provide really rich descriptions, other researchers can then make a determination of how likely your findings are to transfer to whatever they're working on and how applicable and helpful it might be. Dependability. How consistent are the findings in replication? Were you descriptive in your data analysis? Were you descriptive in your recruitment plans? Is there an audit trail? Is there a paper trail that shows step by step? How likely would I be if I were to replicate the steps as you have written them? How likely would I be to reach the same, maybe not exactly, but broadly similar conclusions? Would my findings be similar enough to say, yeah, you did it right? Confirmability. Yes, Rita, it will. Are your findings based on the participants and not your own interpretations? Did you submit the transcripts and notes that you have to the participants so they can check? Am I representing what you said accurately? Is this your experience? Do you ask your participants step by step throughout the analysis to say, are my findings gelling with your experience? Am I getting, is this what you have experienced? The more times you check in with your participants to see if what you are finding aligns with their understanding and their experience, the more likely it is that you have based your findings on your participants, and that leads to confirmability. At this point in your methods chapter, you have to lay out step by step what you are going to do to demonstrate and establish your trustworthiness, considering all of these aspects of researcher trustworthiness. So don't skip on your ethics. Show that you are trustworthy as we then move into your ethics discussion. Research needs to be ethical. I don't have time to go into all of the reasons why, but in general, we should strive to be ethical, moral people. So this is where you will talk about agreements to gain access, IRB approval, site permissions. You'll talk about the timeline and the steps for getting all of these things. Treatment of your human participants, permissions, permission slips, their signed agreements to participate. You'll talk about the ethical considerations of recruitment. What are some of the things that could both benefit and be detrimental about participation? Ethical considerations about data collection. If you want your participants to remain anonymous and you have a focus group, well, your participants will not be anonymous to others in the focus group. How will you handle sensitive data? My dissertation focused on PTSD and suicidal ideation amongst combat veterans. And so I had to consider not just their mental health as their mental health considerations, but I also had to consider what would happen if they disclosed a war crime. What happened, because if you were a part of a university and they disclose certain criminal activities, you become a mandatory reporter as a representative of this organization. What do you do? So that is something that you will have to think about. Do you want them to be anonymous? Will you collect no identifying information? Or will they be confidential? Will you collect the information, but will no one else see it? Will you give them a pseudonym? Will you allow them to choose a pseudonym? How will you choose their pseudonyms if you will choose it? For what, just sort of as an example for mine, what I did with my pseudonyms was I picked out names from various characters from the fantasy novel series, The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. And I assigned pseudonyms from that to my participants because no one was likely to have those names. How will you secure your data? Will you keep it in a locked filing cabinet that only you will have access to? Will you keep it on a specific external hard drive that's encrypted and password protected? After 3 to 5 years, which is standard, how will you destroy it? Will you burn the files? Will you shred the files? Will you delete the hard drive? Keep in mind, just simply deleting files off a hard drive doesn't fully wipe it. Will you wipe the hard drive? As much of a waste as it might be, there is something uniquely satisfying about taking a hard drive with this type of data on and smashing it to fully destroy it. Describe all of these procedures in general. And then, once you've done all of this, you summarize, you recap the main points, and you pull the reader along, transitioning us into your next chapter, which will be your results. So, again, as we've talked about, you have to introduce the chapter. You have a whole host of sections to go through where you will explain in detail how you will collect and how you plan to analyze your data. The more detailed you are, the easier it is not just for others to replicate or to see the utility of, but it is for people to believe that you know what you're doing and you're ready. Because when you're working on this, you haven't gone to the IRB yet, most likely. And so you need to be able to show your committee and the IRB that you were prepared. And the IRB, if you're not familiar, is not just made up of university officials. You'll have professors, you'll have administrators, you'll have lawyers, physicians, psychiatrists. You might have business professionals. You will have people who are not intimately familiar with your research design and with your method. So you need to be able to present this to an educated but diverse audience. So thinking about that, is the last takeaway that I want to leave you with before you would transition to the next chapter. And so I do want to remind you guys, this can be daunting. It's okay. But again, start with your problem, your purpose, and your RQs. Then ask yourself, what data do I need to answer these? Who do I need to talk to? What documents can give me the answer? What observations could give me the answer? Treat this chapter like a recipe. You list the ingredients, and then you give the instructions for how you carry it out. Methods and your methodology will change over time, and this is the expectation, but it will probably not be the reality. Stuff's going to happen. So in your results chapter, you get to talk about what changed and why it changed. And so if you need further support, I want to remind you that Statistics Solutions is a full-service dissertation consulting company providing graduate students with timely editorial support for their dissertations and other scholarly projects, including journal articles and helping you with your prospectus and PowerPoint. We cover from topic development all the way through defense PowerPoint and beyond. For more information about our services and to receive a complimentary 30-minute consultation, which is available Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern United States time, please contact Janine Glaze at info@statisticsolutions.com or at the phone number country code 1-877-437-8622. We can help with all sorts of quantitative and qualitative projects. From start to finish, we're here to help you. All of our experts have graduate degrees, and we are here for your service. Now, it is the weekend, and I've gone a little bit over time, but I would like to give you just a few minutes for any last-minute questions. You're welcome, Karen. Oh, you're both welcome. Rita, you are more than welcome to contact us at a later date for help, for any type of help you need. I do not lead all the services for Chapter 3, Carla, but I do lead the qualitative research services for Chapter 3. I work with others sometimes who work on Chapters 1 and 2, and I work with others when we do mixed methods. I am one of the more commonly chosen qualitative researchers. All right, guys, it is Friday. It is the end of the business day. Hopefully you are going to take some time off this weekend in order to rest. Remember, I know that's not part of the topic of this webinar, but you do not have to write all the time. Take some time to rest for yourself, okay? With that said, I am going to leave you guys, and I do hope that you've had a wonderful time and have a wonderful weekend. And we wish you the best of success with your dissertation and your future in and out of the academy, even if you choose not to hire us for your services. But if you do, we are here for you. Have a wonderful weekend. Goodbye.